Make Better Wealth Decisions, a podcast that explores how financial advisors' blind spots can harm your investments. I'm your host, John DeGuy, a portfolio manager with Design Securities in Toronto. In this podcast, we'll provide advice on how you can achieve better outcomes by maximizing investments and minimizing taxes. Let's put our thinking caps on as we consciously decide to get smarter about our money. Welcome to what used to be called Bullshift the Podcast. We're changing. The decision was made after 80 some odd episodes and 19 months of Bullshift the Podcast that the time had come to put the term Bullshift to bed and to rebrand the podcast to make it a little more accessible. Going forward, effective immediately, the new name of the podcast will be Make Better Wealth Decisions. Now, there's a real purpose behind all this. The joke would be people got tired of the bullshit. Ha ha. The other thing that you might want to say, however, is that there's a real recognition here that people need to think about how they make decisions about their finances, their wealth, their financial management. And a lot of people do what is seen to be presumptively correct. And that's usually the way things ought to be. And that's usually fairly harmless. But it can be harmful. And the new podcast will be dealing with many of the same themes as we've always dealt with Bullshift. Only now we'll be talking more about explicit wealth decision making. So how do you choose? When you're presented with a circumstance, we're trying to not be too prescriptive in terms of what you should do, but we are going to be very prescriptive in terms of what you should think about. Rather than saying this is the right answer because everyone's circumstances are different, Make Better Wealth Decisions, we'll be talking more about, well, what should you be thinking about? What should you be focusing on as you wade through the myriad options that are in front of you as you think about what's best for you in your personal finances? I'm still going to be focusing on a lot of the ideas that I have in my 3 previous books, so we can talk about those a little bit in turn. The first book that I had was called The Professional Financial Advisor. We put out 4 editions, and The Professional Financial Advisor, 4th edition, came out in 2016, talks about how the financial services industry is becoming a profession. The way doctors, dentists, lawyers, and accountants have been professions for generations, financial advisors have been grown up in a culture of sales. And a lot of what was in The Professional Financial Advisor talked about regulatory reform and how the industry was evolving. It's interesting. It's of some value for people who are thinking about how they work with their advisor and maybe wondering if their advisor might not be a bit of a sales representative and not sufficiently professional in the way they do things, not sufficiently evidence-based and so forth. That would be a good book for you to have a look at if that's what's of concern to you. My second book, it's called Stand Up to the Financial Services Industry. It came out in 2019. And the title is a little bit cheeky because I'm trying to get people to rise up and show some initiative here. The interest here is to recognize that financial advisors have misguided beliefs. A lot of financial advisors believe things that simply aren't true. And it's not because they're nefarious. It's not because they're trying to pull the wool over people's eyes, but rather because the industry has pulled the wool over their eyes. They believe things that are untrue because the industry has done nothing to disabuse them of these truths. And so there are risks that you have if you're an investor or working with an advisor. If your advisor believes things to be true that are obviously not true, there's a risk to you. Stand Up to the Financial Services Industry gives you the tools. I think I've got something like 45 or 50 questions to help you to do a 3-part process. Number 1, get the courage to ask your advisor the questions. Number 2, the actual specific verbatim questions you might want to ask if you want to get to the bottom of things. And then thirdly, the sorts of answers you should be looking for, because a lot of people don't ask the questions because they wouldn't be able to tell a good answer from a not so good answer, even if they did ask. So we're trying to empower people, and that's what Stand Up to the Financial Services Industry was about. Finally, in 2023, I released my 3rd book, Bullshift. Bullshift is about how the industry uses optimism bias, the idea that everything is perfectly fine, to get people to think bullishly, favorably about their investing decisions and their portfolios. And once again, everyone's got bias. It's not as though we're trying to eliminate bias. In fact, I don't think anybody could reasonably do anything like that. What you're trying to do is to recognize it, identify it, modify it, and be more able to think about how you yourself might be subjected to certain biases as you make your decisions, and hopefully you can make better decisions. That, of course, involves decisions that you make in concert with your advisor, because everyone's human. Humans are all biased. That means your advisor is biased. Once again, the suggestion is not to say that financial advisors are nefarious. Rather, it is to say that we're human. And as a result, decision-making involves the recognition that human people make human errors, and that in order to overcome those errors and those blind spots, you need to think more purposefully, more meaningfully, less presumptively. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to even come to a different conclusion, so long as you think about things in a meaningful, helpful way. So, Make Better Wealth Decisions will be mere continuation of what we've been doing all along, what the previous books that I've written have been talking about, and what the industry needs to do going forward, which is to incorporate behavioral economics and behavioral finance in the way advice is given to retail investors right now, but specifically in a way that is actionable and that helps them to identify the blind spots in the advice that they're receiving and their own tendencies and biases so that they can overcome them to make better decisions. I hope you like the rebrand.
John DeGooey is a portfolio manager with Designed Securities in Toronto. The views expressed in this programme are not to be construed as specific advice. It is recommended that you consult a qualified advisor before taking action. His books, The Professional Financial Advisor 4, Stand Up to the Financial Services Industry, and Bullshift are available through Amazon and in bookstores throughout Canada. You can reach John at 647-STAND-UP. That's 647-782-6387, or at jdegooey@designedsecurities.ca.